The sport of pickleball has had explosive growth over the last 10 years. In Bloomington-Normal, Parks and Rec departments have added a lot of courts. A private concern is building an indoor pickleball facility. Along with the rise in the number of players, there has been huge growth in the number of injuries from the pastime. One researcher projected there were more than 19,000 pickleball injuries in the U.S. in 2022. In this edition of Sound Health, we look at the dark side of pickleball. WGLT's Charlie Schlenker talked with Dr. Joseph Newcomer. He's an orthopedic surgeon at Carl McLean County Orthopedics. Newcomer says over time, the nature of pickleball injuries has changed.
You know, as we're seeing more and more younger participants in pickleball, we've moved from the injuries that were typical for the older participant of fractures or chronic tendinopathies to knee injuries and sudden acceleration and deceleration injuries that we see. I've seen cartilage injuries. I've seen Achilles tendon ruptures. We've seen acute shoulder issues too with rotator cuffs.
Is there any inherent difference between the injuries that you see with pickleball and the injuries you see with tennis or racquetball?
Well, certainly in the older population, I think people fall into this false sense of security with pickleball. I think the court is a lot smaller. They see a big wiffle ball, and people feel like it's a sport that they can just begin without any proper training or getting into shape. Whereas, you know, when people think of tennis, they're going to lead up to playing tennis. They're going to get back into shape. It's a bigger court. You've got more reaction time on the tennis court. So pickleball can lend itself to injuries because people aren't necessarily thinking about listening to their bodies.
So is it the nature of the sport, or is it the perception of risk associated with the sport?
My opinion for the older patient injuries is the perception. Oftentimes, people just aren't listening to their bodies. You'll see people on pickleball courts for hours because they tend to rotate in and they rotate out. And if they're not listening to their bodies, that can lend itself to injuries.
When did you start seeing pickleball injuries? How long ago?
It's been at least a decade now. The first group of injuries that we used to see were usually wrist-related, a lot of falls. People were just getting into the sport, and we went from the fractures to now we're seeing chronic issues. We're seeing tendinitis, tendinopathy. Some people are getting tennis elbow, gripping the racket too tight for too long a period of time. The injuries are evolving.
How have they changed?
Well, we're starting to see, like I said, the acceleration-deceleration injuries, which is like your Achilles tendon ruptures and your cartilage injuries in the knees, as opposed to the fractures. We're seeing fewer and fewer fractures. I think people are getting smarter with regards to what their limitations are on the court.
If, like any sport, you need to prepare to play it, how should people warm up to play pickleball?
That's a great question, and I think that is the $64,000 question: is how can people set themselves up for success? First and foremost, what you just touched upon, which is the warm up, is so important. How many times do you see people just going right out and start hitting the ball around? That's not a proper warm up. A warm stretch to get the tendons out to length is really important. But even beyond that, things that people can do to prepare themselves to play in the off season, right? So continuing to maintain a cardiovascular semblance of shape. They can do balance training. The older population, and when I say older, I'm in that population at my current state. So I would say anybody older than 40 at this point really should spend the time working on exercises that promote balance and exercises that promote core strengthening. The lower extremities are extremely important, so your quadriceps and your hamstrings, making sure that they're in condition, but also working on back stretching and back exercises and lower abdominal core exercises. And then for your older patients, one thing that can help with the falls is balance. There's a lot of different exercises you can do to work on balance. Believe it or not, yoga as well as Pilates there's some great poses that promote balance. Heel to toe walking, single leg stance, balancing on uneven surfaces. So, trying to balance on a cushion or a Bocce ball is quite helpful.
What is good for getting ready for sudden changes in direction that any racket sport requires?
Yeah, that's and one thing I want to make clear, injuries are going to happen. I mean, it happens in every sport. We're going to continue to see them just because when you have sudden acceleration, deceleration, change in direction, it's hard to get joints prepared for that. And as you see younger athletes getting injured with similar type of mechanisms, some things you just can't prepare for. But when we get a little bit older and we start having arthritic changes in our joints, it's even more imperative that they do activities that would challenge that to get the biofeedback and the proprioception in the joints able to change direction.
How should people rehab pickleball injuries?
I recommend seeking professional consultation. This is not self-serving promotion, but I think people tend to sit on injuries, and it's important to make sure that you're getting proper care and attention. But the one thing I would say about rest and recovery and how important that is, as we age, we lose water, and as we lose water, tissues become more brittle. And so hydration is really, really important. So when you're done participating for a couple of hours, it's important to make sure that you maintain hydration, you get the proper rest. It's a cool down stretch can also be quite helpful. But again, the adage, it's all fun and games until somebody gets hurt. We, as the sport continues to evolve and more people participating, I suspect we're still going to see these injuries. For a lot of people, it's hard to turn that switch off.
That's orthopedic surgeon Dr. Joseph Newcomer with McLean County Orthopedics. He spoke with WGLT's Charlie Schlenker. One study suggests older people make up a disproportionate share of pickleball injuries, though that is changing as the sport becomes more popular with younger age groups. About 9 million people in the U.S. play pickleball. Newcomer says it's better for those who do get injured to seek same-day treatment.
Support for WGLT health coverage comes from Carle Health. You can count on Carle as your partner in healthcare. Information at carle.org.